It seems this summer event just keeps getting hotter and hotter. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here with a servant spotlight for the one servant who can unite mecha fans and waifu lovers across the world, MHXX. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively and an overall grade, comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. Now, on MHX's stats. MHX has a max HP of 11,250 and a max attack of 9,751. She is the only 4-star foreigner, so she technically has the highest HP and attack stats for her class and rarity, for whatever that's worth. Although even outside of her foreigner class, her attack stat is above average for a 4-star servant, while her HP is slightly below average. Overall, MHX's stat spread is pretty balanced, although with a slight edge towards offense. Taking a look at her skills, her first skill is Powered Suit Rank EX. It applies invincibility for 1 turn and increases her attack for 1 turn between 30 and 50% depending on level. Her second skill is Detective Intuition Rank E. It grants her between 10 to 20 crit stars and also decreases her critical star gather rate for 1 turn between 50 and 100%, both depending on level. And finally, her last skill is Justice of World's End Rank A. It applies Ignore Invincibility for 1 turn. It also increases her NP gauge between 20 and 30% and gives her a bonus against threat to humanity enemies for 1 turn between 30 and 50%, both depending on level. As for her passives, she has Existence Outside of the Domain Rank D, which generates 2 crit stars per turn and increases her debuff resist by 4%, Cosmo Reactor Rank B, which increases her crit star drop rate by 8%, Independent Action Rank A, which increases her crit strength by 10%, and Riding Rank A, which increases her quick card effectiveness by 10%. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, MHXX has an Arts Buster deck with Quick Arts Buster Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Ether Space, howbeit the order. It increases her own attack for 1 turn between 20 and 60% depending on overcharge. It also deals significant damage to a single enemy with between a 900 and 1500% damage modifier depending on level, and it deals an additional 150% bonus damage against Saber class servants. Taking a closer look at her cards, we see that her quick card hits 4 times, her arts hits 3 times, her buster hits 4 times, and her extra attack hits 4 times. She has an NP gain rate of 0.64% and a star rate of 15%. She has some good NP gain due to the high hit counts on her cards and her arts-oriented deck, and her high hit counts and passives also give her fairly strong star generating. Just as was the case with BB, as an extra class servant, MHXX has some out of the ordinary Ascension material requirements. In particular, she doesn't need any pieces, monuments, or skill gems. Instead, for her Ascension, she is going to require 8 of each of these: Fangs, Gears, Grease, Metals, Bloodstone Tears, Giant Rings, Reverse Dragon Scales, and Longinus. Fangs have a 62% drop rate at Deming in America, Gears have a 45% drop rate at Barrel Tower in Shinjuku, Grease has a 20% drop rate at the Northern Cliffs in Agartha, Metals have a 35% drop rate at the Royal Castle in Camelot, Bloodstone Tears have an 18% drop rate at Shinjuku to Chome in Shinjuku, Giant Rings have a 40% drop rate at the Giant's Flower Garden in Lost Belt 2, Reverse Dragon Scales have a 12% drop rate at Nipper in Babylonia, and Longinus have an 18% drop rate at the Blood Fort in Babylonia. For skill leveling, MHXX is going to need 8 Heroes Proof, 8 Fangs, 10 Gears, 10 Metals, 10 Aurora Steel, 12 Giant Rings, 12 Longinus, and 12 Reverse Scales per skill. Aurora Steel have a 39% drop rate at the Castle of Ice and Snow in Lost Belt 2, and Heroes Proof have a 58% drop rate at the Pirate Ship in Okeanos. MHXX is a top tier cutie wearing a mecha suit which she can take off to reveal her 10 out of 10 bikini clad body. If that sentence didn't convince you to roll for her, then I don't think there's much more I can say in this video to convince you otherwise, but nonetheless I shall try. Currently, MHXX has the distinction of being the only 4-star foreigner, which can be a huge bonus to a lot of players considering how important the foreigner class can be for some late game content, which is littered with berserker enemies. But beyond that, she also sports some surprisingly good stats with solid attack, good natural NP gain, and strong star generating that is bolstered through her great passives like Existence Outside the Domain, Cosmo Reactor, and Riding. Her only statistical shortcoming is her lackluster HP, but while it is below average, MHXX is far from fragile. In fact, her first skill, Powered Suit, grants her invincibility for a whole turn as well as an attack mana burst. And this is a great skill for a number of reasons. The flat 50% buff to attack can sometimes be even stronger and more consistent than the card-based mana burst, as it guarantees that all of your attacks in a Brave Chain are going to receive the full damage buff. Furthermore, this skill also shares the same low 5-turn cooldown as the typical mana burst, even though it has a full-on invincibility attached to it, which is amazing since this skill's cooldown is low enough that you can use it both defensively and offensively in some situations without much drawback, especially if you have a certain cooldown reducing fox on your team. Quick and easy access to an invincibility drastically bolsters MHX's survivability, but it isn't her only low cooldown skill. Detective Intuition is basically an instinct skill with a shockingly low 4-turn cooldown. But before you start spamming it, be aware that it also comes with the effect of decreasing MHX's star weight by 100%. A star bomb effect that's this strong is actually quite good. However, the star weight decrease is puzzlingly counterproductive, as generally speaking, you want MHX to use those stars since she's built for attacking and critting. The best way to use this skill outside of supporting another crit servant is to only activate it if you already have 25 or 30 stars in your pool. That way the extra 20 stars from the skill pushes you to the limit and guarantees crits for everyone. Finally, MHXX also has a good piece of utility in her third skill, Justice of World's End, which charges her NP gauge by 30%, gives her a huge buff against enemies who have the Threat to Humanity trait, and grants her Invincibility Pierce. The NP charge portion of this skill is by far the best part, as 30% is a very good amount of charge, and it pairs very well with her already good NP gain, and it enables her to spam her Noble Phantasm in some setups, especially given the short cooldown. Invincibility Pierce is also good to have for some tough content and boss fights. The buff, however, won't come into play very often, as very few enemies are classified as threats to humanity. But it is important to note that all foreigners have the Threat to Humanity trait, and that they're weak to other foreigners, which gives MHXX a good niche as an anti-foreigner foreigner. For skill level priority, I recommend going with Powered Suit first for the good damage buff, followed by Justice of World's End for the NP charge, and then finally Detective Intuition as it's more situational. MHX's Noble Phantasm is a single target arts nuke that further buffs her own attack and deals extra damage to Saber enemies. The NP hits very hard thanks to that 20% attack buff combined with the buff from Powered Suit. And because the Noble Phantasm has the attack buff effect built into it, MHX doesn't have to be as reliant on her mana burst buff to do decent damage with her NP. Unfortunately though, while the buff against Sabers is decent, it still doesn't beat out the class advantage of the Archer class, so it does feel kind of pointless. MHXX is a straightforward arts attacker. She is purely designed to tear through an enemy boss's defenses and deal big burst damage to them. And this boss killer role works fantastically for her, especially given the game's meta. Most of the strongest enemies and bosses in later stages of the game are berserkers, so MHX is uniquely situated to be a counter to many of these late game threats. Her good star generating and high star weight also set her up to be a pretty decent crit servant, and those crits can further fuel her NP gain. So much like Archer, Arturia, or Kuro, she can fill the role of an anti-boss art servant who can NP spam them into oblivion. But for all of her upsides, MHX also has some big drawbacks. For one thing, her bonus buffs are extremely niche and hardly ever come into play. Since there are very few threats against humanity and bringing her into saber fights doesn't make much sense, those two portions of her kit go almost completely unutilized. Furthermore, while her skills have a short cooldown, her attack buffs only last one turn, which means all of her damage is concentrated onto her Noble Phantasm. Without any charisma or 3-turn arts buff to lean on, her face card damage is weak. And this leads into what is possibly her biggest flaw: her overall lack of utility. MHX is a pure boss killer and doesn't really offer anything aside from Noble Phantasm damage. No team-wide buffs and no enemy debuffs. And this can be detrimental in tougher fights where you need more than just damage. And this is especially bad for a foreigner since every class deals bonus damage to berserkers, which means that from an offensive standpoint, MHXX doesn't really offer anything extra to a berserker fight, which should be her main attribute. MHXX is best suited for an arts team, especially an arts team that offers a lot of utility and damage buffs to make up for her own lack of them. I highly recommend pairing her with servants like Tamamo, Guildcaster, or Paracelsus. Tamamo has the best synergy with her since she can lower her already low cooldowns as well as grant her a high uptime arts buff to improve her NP gain and face card damage. Guildcaster works very similarly. All his damage buffs stack well with MHX and drastically increase her burst damage, plus she also benefits from his star generating buff. And Paracelsus is just the best free-to-play art support, and he can easily enable MHX's NP spam while also giving her decent damage buffs. But you can also build MHX for a more crit-based approach, in which case any servant who can buff her crit damage will help a ton, since she has no good crit buffs outside of her passive. Servants like Chiron, Caesar, and Holmes are excellent. Chiron is a great support due to his massive high uptime crit steroid, and he can also buff MHX's arts cards. Caesar is a good substitute if you lack Chiron, as he can also massively buff MHX's crit damage and her NP damage. And Holmes can both generate stars as well as improve MHX's crit damage, and once he receives his buff in 2 years, he can also improve her NP spamming capability. MHX's Bondcraft Essence is Memories of Earth. It buffs the party's damage against Saber enemies by 20%. It can help if you bring her as an archer support to a Saber fight, but again, it is kind of pointless as you're just better off bringing another archer that has charisma instead. So I recommend giving MHX craft essences that bolster her arts card effectiveness and NP damage to get the best results. Craft essences like Formal Craft, Dive to Blue, Heaven's Feel, and Painting Summer, so that she can really set herself up for NP spamming. If you want to go with crit builds, then any craft essence that buffs crit damage and arts card effectiveness or NP gain is best. Craft essences like Another Ending, Heading to Treefoss, and Trick or Treatment. In the future, I recommend using Royal Icing, which we should get in October. It buffs arts card effectiveness and NP damage tremendously, so it's ideal for maximizing MHX's burst damage and NP spam. Overall, MHXX is a solid arts attacker. Her high NP burst damage allows her to take down tougher boss enemies, and because of her good NP gain and NP charge, she can spam and loop with proper supports. Her class and high survivability also make her a good pick for dealing with some late game bosses, and she can even be built into a decent crit servant. However, a good portion of her kit is too niche and situational to play a role in most battles, and her non-NP damage is severely lacking due to her low uptime buffs. But worst of all, her overall lack of utility and team support makes her highly inflexible for anything outside of pure damage. So all in all, she gets a B from me. She's not as bad as some people think. She does have tremendous upsides and can be a very strong pure attacker, but she also has some big downsides when you consider that she doesn't really bring anything unique to the table or any kind of support or versatility. And those are my thoughts on MHXX. She's not bad, but not great either. But don't let me stop you from rolling for her, because at the end of the day, she's still the hottest summer servant. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, I have spotlights out for Jean Archer, Summer Jolter, and Summer BB all out right now. They'll be linked on screen and in the description down below, so check them out if you haven't already. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over on our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.